The Sunfallen Road, Chapter 15. Although I appeared as youthful as ever when alone in our house, I'd sought to learn the flesh-bending gift from Marguerite, who used it to alter her appearance to reflect a more accurate age. After all, she'd said to me, people talk when you spend 20 years in a city and don't age, even in the modern age. She'd taught me willingly, as payment for including her security needs in the exchange treaty with the Regent of Paris. I used it subtly over the years, and now that I was approaching 30, in human terms anyway, I still looked youthful, but aged some from the 18-year-old girl I really looked like without the glamour. It struck me as an example of something Silver said often: everything happens at the right time. I had learned the flesh-bending gift not long after I had started keeping company with humans again, so I suppose he was right. I visited the university often in the evenings. I'd met many of his colleagues, and some of his students had a lot of questions for me about the nature of my work as a diplomat. Apparently, he had given several examples in his philosophy classes regarding certain dilemmas I faced as a diplomat. One of his students, who was majoring in linguistics, came to me for tutoring in language studies, and several of the professors had enlisted me for help with translation. What struck me about that decade was that over time, the voices dwindled more and more, and the periods of time in which I didn't hear them stretched out. But sometimes, when they spoke now, I could discern more of what they said, and what they said disquieted me. They seemed to be warning me of something, or else pushing me towards something. I couldn't tell which, not then. One day we were in the machine room. Silver was grading papers, and I was doing some translation, English to Greek, for a friend at the university. He sighed and looked over at me. I looked at him and I said, "It's come to that, has it?" "It has," he said. "Have you thought about it?" "I have." "And?" I stopped typing and I settled my hands in my lap. "I don't know. Perhaps." He smiled. "That's a better answer than last time." I chuckled wryly. "To be sure." He put down his pen. "Maybe you should talk to someone." I looked at him. He was just 30, beautiful as ever, handsome and slim. I looked at him a long moment, studying his thoughts. He loved me beyond anything, but my lack of genuine humanity worried him more than he really wanted to admit. I said, "When I have finished this work for Patrick, I'll go and speak with the Regent's chaplain." He looked surprised, but nodded. "All right, let me know what they say." I nodded, and engaging the speed gift, commenced typing, my fingers flying so fast over the keys that Silver sat and stared at me for a full 5 minutes before turning back to his desk. We owned too many cars, I thought to myself as I entered our garage. 4 of them now. I climbed into Silver's Miata. Although I loved my Mustang, his had satellite radio, and I was in the mood for distraction. I switched on the classical station as I drove into the city, tried not to let my thoughts wander. I arrived at the Regent's Court for the first time in close to a decade. I almost always wore my dragon ring on the same hand as my wedding ring, which is a plain platinum band with an inscription inside. "Love is strong as death," read the inscription. Silver and I had gotten matching bands, and we'd chosen platinum because it was stronger than gold. Symbolism was something near and dear to Silver's heart. It was winter. I wore knee-high fur-lined boots under a white knitted sweater dress and heavy tights. I gave my hooded wool coat to the doorman, who indicated, with a nod of his head, that I was welcome. I entered the hall. Michael Glass in the center of the room, talking with a woman with blazing red hair and dark eyes. When they turned to look at me, a spark of recognition flashed in the red-headed vampire's eyes, although I knew for sure that I did not know her. I also knew at once that I was a little, only a very little, younger than she. "Lady Aguilar!" exclaimed Glass. "It has been some time." "Indeed it has, Your Grace," I said, inclining my head to him. He came forward and clasped my hands. "How have you fared since you left us?" I smiled. "Very well, thank you," I said. "I've since been married." "How wonderful! Congratulations to you," said the Regent. "Permit me to introduce Her Grace Ariane Engelmann, Regent of Berlin." Now I understood the recognition. This woman knew who I was before I met her, probably from talk of others at the court of Berlin. Your Grace, I said, inclining my head towards her. She smiled briefly, although the smile only touched her lips. Her Grace has come on a visit of state, said Glass. She is making a tour of several courts of Europe and the US, mainly in the interest of strengthening her rule and learning from her peers. Why is that? Does the court of Berlin find itself uneasy? I asked, recalling now what Rudy had told me all those years ago about the new Berlin regent. Ariane smiled an icy smile. Perhaps, she said, but many of my fellow regents have ruled for many years, and it is in my best interest to learn from their wisdom. In that instant, I understood. She knew that Klaus had wanted me to be the next regent. She knew that perhaps I was more powerful and that I could better command the loyalty of the Berlin court than she. She was not here to learn from Glass. She was here to enlist my help in herding the Berlin court like sheep. If I had not visited court this night, she would have turned up on my doorstep. But to what do we owe the pleasure of your visit? Asked Glass. If I may, Your Grace, I would speak with your chaplain, I said. Glass himself was not particularly religious, but he kept a chaplain on retainer to serve those vampires who were religious, or at least spiritual. I have a personal dilemma that I could use his advice on, I said, glancing at Ariane, who merely raised her eyebrows. If he is not available, though, maybe I could come another time? Not at all, said a new voice, and I turned to see a stocky and sturdily built man of Italian descent in priest's cloth. Despite his obvious vampiric blood, his eyes were kind. Lady Aguilar, I have heard much talk of you in these halls. He looked at Glass, and Glass nodded. Come with me. We will talk. He put my arm in his and led me from the hall, and I took one more backward glance at Lady Ariane, whose smile had disappeared, to be replaced with a look of irritation.